Yeah, the frequently start now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're going to. We'd like to begin our Merrimack Valley Chamber Mass Economic Development Council Joint Economic Development Forum. We're very honored that we have the Secretary of the Massachusetts Housing and Economic Development, Michael Kennealy, who will be introduced shortly. I'd like to just introduce a few people, and then I'll turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Lane Glenn, the president of Northern Essex Community College, who is also the chairperson of the Merrimack Valley Chamber's Economic Development Committee. I'd like to introduce Roberta Breen. Roberta is the chairwoman of the Massachusetts Economic Development Council, and she's our co-host today. And Roberta, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. Joe's been a longstanding partner with the Massachusetts Economic Development Council. We've been established since '63. We're a nonprofit that serves economic development professionals throughout the state of Massachusetts. We have a little over 100 members. It's a very affordable membership rate of $90 a year, and our focus is really for those in municipal government, those doing community development and economic development, and we provide programming throughout the year, now virtually, to our members and to those who aren't members in areas of economic development, in areas of sort of new trends in real estate, as well as energy savings, and we also work closely with Mass Development and the state's Economic Development Office to bring new programs to our members. So in this age of virtual, which we're all doing, we've begun a roundtable that is on our website, which is massedc.org, and you can register there. It's free. And our roundtable is focused on really just what questions people have, what issues are arising, and having a brainstorming session with our members and with our guests to come up with some ideas for how to either fund a project or permit a project or deal with a particular situation. I'm sure we have plenty of pandemic questions. I know in Worcester, we're trying to cite and assist in financing our regional food hub. So that will be one of the topics that we'll be talking about at our first roundtable, which is September 30th. So massedc.org is where you can find more information. We're happy to have you as a member, or certainly just happy to have you at one of our roundtables to see what we're about and to hopefully assist you as we make our way through the year of 2020. So thanks, Joe, very much for the opportunity.
No, and thank you to all the MEDC people for all they do around the state. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Lane Glenn. I've known Lane for a number of years in two capacities. The first is he's, I think, the very, very aggressive and instrumental and very successful president of the community college, Northern Essex Community College. He has done a tremendous job in expanding the outreach of the college. He has focused, in my opinion, wisely on issues of economic development, workforce development for all the people in the region. And I think he has made very, very successful outreach for the chamber and for the business community, utilizing the skills and the opportunities that the Northern Essex Community College presents to all of us. And I think it's been a tremendous benefit for everybody, and I look for continued success at Northern Essex. Lane is also the chairperson of the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce's Economic Development Committee, and that's how he's here today in that capacity. So Lane, I'd like to introduce you, welcome you, and turn it over to you. If you can believe that, I'm actually going to give you the mic. So welcome, Lane.
I'm still waiting, Joe. I'm still waiting for the mic. Do I have the mic now?
I'm now muted. I am now muted.
All right, Joe is muted. Rayanne, can you make sure he stays muted? Thank you, Joe, for the introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you to all the members of the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce who are on the line with us today. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to all of our participants. It's wonderful to see State Representative Linda Dean Campbell here on the line with us, and State Representative Christina Minicucci. If and as I see other elected officials join us, I'll be sure to mention them as well. It's great to have you here. Please note that I did put a note to everyone in the chat bar that if you have some questions for our speakers as we go along here today, please feel free to write them in the chat. Whatever time we have left after our three speakers have had a chance to present, we'll come back around and hopefully answer some questions for them. So it's, first of all, my great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker today, our Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Michael Kennealy. Day in and day out, his job Number one is to help the state and its cities and towns grow businesses, grow housing, grow prosperity for everyone in the Commonwealth. And I think Secretary Kennealy is uniquely qualified for this work. There are really two sides to his resume, and each one speaks volumes about the kind of person he is, his talent, his qualifications, and really his commitment to public service. On one side of his resume, you'll see that he graduated magna cum laude with a degree in government from Dartmouth, and he has an MBA from the Harvard Business School. He's a really smart guy. He used that education and those credentials to propel himself into a very successful career in the private sector. He spent 15 years at Spectrum Equity, a private equity firm that he helped grow to more than $5 billion in assets. He knows his stuff. On the other side of his resume, he left Spectrum in the private sector in 2013 to be the special assistant to Jeff Riley, the receiver of the Lawrence Public Schools, when that district became the first one in the Commonwealth to go into receivership. And for 2 years, he showed Lawrence and the Merrimack Valley just what kind of leader and public servant he is. That's when I met Mike. Not only did he devote himself to the turnaround of the Lawrence Public Schools, but to the economic development as well, helping me and dozens of other leaders in Lawrence create the Lawrence Partnership, helping connect students in Lawrence to internship and career opportunities. Really throughout his career, Mike has been a stellar volunteer, giving back to the community in countless ways, as a coach, as a board member, as a trustee for many organizations. The Commonwealth is extremely fortunate to have someone with his experience and his talents as its secretary for Housing and Economic Development. And the people of Massachusetts and here in the Merrimack Valley are very fortunate to have such a caring public servant in this role. Secretary, Mike, it's a pleasure to have you here. Over to you.
Well, Lane, thank you so much for that really, really kind introduction. I really appreciate it. I have to say I will always treasure my 2 years spent in Lawrence. It was just an incredible example of teamwork and leadership on so many people's parts. Including yours, Lane. You were such a great colleague during that period of time. I really enjoyed getting to know you and working with you during that process. And I really appreciate your very kind words, and great to be with you all here today. I also want to thank Joe for having me. Joe has been a great colleague always, but through the current pandemic of the last 6 months, and having Joe as a participant on our weekly, now bi-weekly calls with Chambers of Commerce, and hearing Joe's input has been invaluable. Great to be here with Rep. Minicucci and Rep. Dean Campbell as well, and looking forward to a great discussion. So thank you all. I'm going to run through a handful of slides on a bit on the state of the economy today, kind of where we've been, where we are now, and plans to get us, frankly, to a better place, given what we've experienced the last 6 months. So I'll get into this, and I really look forward to your questions and comments afterwards. So I think someone's going to be turning the slides for me.
Yes, I have them up. You'll just have to tell me when to go to the next one.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Let's go to the next one then. So a bit on our pre-COVID-19 economy. You know, we had an incredibly strong economy. We've had that for a number of years. We had very low unemployment. We'd added a couple 100,000 jobs in the 5 years predating COVID-19. We have been a world leader in the innovation economy for generations now. We had very low unemployment, very high wage, very high growth. We had a lot of things going for us, and we still do. And these are still the attributes we have that we'll seek to build off of as we enter a period of economic recovery. But just a reminder that heading into this period of time, the Massachusetts economy was incredibly strong. Next, please. Now, we spent a lot of time in 2019 coming up with a new economic development plan for the Commonwealth. And by state law, every new term of a governor requires a new economic development plan. And so we did in 2019, largely what we did in 2015, which is travel the state, hear from a very broad range of stakeholders in every region across the Commonwealth, and gather their input on what they saw as the economic agenda for the second term of the Baker-Polito administration. And what we hit on was really four main, what we call pillars, the four things we really wanted to focus on economically. One is to respond to the housing crisis. I'll spend a few minutes on each one. Respond to the housing crisis, build vibrant communities, support business competitiveness, and train a skilled workforce. You know, briefly on housing, I will say we were using the term housing crisis long before any of us knew what COVID-19 was. and great to be here with Lou Minicucci, who's done such a great job developing housing across the Commonwealth. We need a lot more housing. And leading up to this period of time, we had such great economic growth and such tight labor markets and strong population growth. We weren't producing nearly enough housing. We simply need a lot more housing of all kinds, perhaps especially affordable housing. So respond to the housing crisis was one of our main pillars. Build vibrant communities. You know, we view ourselves in the administration as active, engaged partners with our municipal leaders and other stakeholders. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars in capital dollars in our communities, helping them build infrastructure and prepare sites for development. And so we sought to come up with new economic development tools to help us build even more vibrant communities going forward. Support business competitiveness really has a couple different angles to it. One is support for the innovation economy, trying to identify sectors of the innovation economy where the state should have a leadership position, areas where we felt like we had some natural competitive advantages that we could identify and build strategies around. You know, we've been a world leader in so many sectors for a long time now. We're the global leader in life sciences. We're a leader in software and advanced manufacturing in many other areas. So our mission, we viewed our mandate as come up with the next areas and build strategies to have us be a leader in those. That's the first part of business competitiveness. The second part is support for our small business sector. We recognize access to capital, access to space, access to technical assistance. These are all challenges our small businesses have in normal times. And these pillars really, you know, long predate COVID-19. We saw this as things we had to get after now in the second term. And the fourth was to train a skilled workforce. And the governor, way back when in the first term, formed something called the Workforce Skills Cabinet, which is the Secretaries of Economic Development, Education, and Labor. And our mandate then was to come together and work on closing skills gaps around the state. And this is a period of time of very low unemployment, where there are probably more jobs open than there were people looking for jobs. And where certain areas like IT, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and the trades were having access, finding enough talent. And so we built a set of strategies around that. And with this new plan, developed further strategies. But so those are the four main things. Going back to the end of 2019, we felt like we had to get after housing crisis, communities, business competitiveness, and workforce skills development. And then we have what we call our 5 principles. Equitable opportunity. This is a core principle of our administration and a core principle of this plan. The notion that everyone in the Commonwealth, in every region, every community deserves their chance at growth and opportunity and success. The environment, we recognize we're in a changing world in terms of the environment. We have to be cognizant of that as we formulate our development plans. Regional strategies, recognizing we're you know, one Commonwealth, but 351 cities and towns and many distinct regions. Each region has unique attributes, unique opportunities and assets and needs. That's got to inform our thinking about economic development. Accessible government is the fourth. We recognize, for example, that we have a lot of programs, all well-intentioned, all well-created, but perhaps that we may be too many, or perhaps we can make it easier to access those programs. So making sure that we're as responsive as we are to our constituencies, among our municipal leaders, our citizens, and our businesses. And then finally, infrastructure. It's one of the core things government can do, is commit money to build infrastructure around the state, public dollars that will help facilitate private development. So that's how we saw the world coming out of 2019 into 2020 in terms of the pillars and principles of our economic agenda. Next slide, please. Well, obviously the world changed really dramatically for all of us a little over 6 months ago. And I want to talk about the impact on Massachusetts of COVID-19. A decline in our economy at an annualized rate of almost 44%. Consumer spending decreased 40% from March to April. Decreases in wage and salary income. Unemployment increased from 2.9% in early 2020 to 17% in June, now down to around 16%. Big impacts on small business revenue as well. So we know this has been, to say the least, an incredibly challenging time economically for everybody across the state. And these are some of the metrics that inform just how challenging that time has been. Let's go to the next one. We've done a lot of analysis on this now as we're into reopening of the economy. And I'll talk about the reopening strategy and the work that went into that. But now that we're in reopening, thinking about economic recovery, we've asked ourselves, why is the economic impact on the state been so great of COVID-19? And we really have identified a couple different factors. The high and early case outbreak. We are number 3 now in cases of COVID-19 measured per capita, behind New York and New Jersey. We got hit hard, we got hit early. And that led to a set of decisions around closing the physical locations of non-essential businesses and other things. But we made a set of decisions for public health purposes, given how hard we were hit by COVID. But that is important context for how we think about recovery and coming out of this period of time. We were a very hard hit state. The second factor related to the protocols and practices put in place to fight the pandemic is around population and mobility. You know, we've had a stay-at-home advisory. Now we call a safer at home advisory. There were a number of businesses that could not operate physically, as we all know. There were things put in place that made it hard to get around the Commonwealth, and that had an enormous economic impact as well. One thing we ruled out as we did our analysis was around sector mix. You know, did we have a disproportionate share of our economy made up of sectors that are particularly challenged? And the answer to that is no. So if you look at, you know, retail, restaurants, hospitality, other services, what we call our Main Street businesses, those have been incredibly hard hit, to say the least. But our economy is not made up of a larger proportion of those types of businesses than others. So our explanation, having gone through a lot of data and looked at it, is the relatively high impact of COVID-19 on our economy is a function of how hard we were hit by the virus and the practices put in place to fight the virus. Let's go to the next one. We know it's had an enormous impact all across the state. Our businesses, our communities, and our workers. Specific industry sectors, the ones I named earlier, have been incredibly hard hit. Our small and medium businesses, our women and minority-owned businesses have had an enormous impact over the last 6 months. Our communities, in particular, our downtowns, our downtown business districts, our tourism-dependent regions, any communities with limited internet access. We really tried to map out by community where the impact has been and come up with strategies to mitigate that impact. And our employees, for sure. I mean, with a now 16% unemployment rate, the impact on our workforce has been terrible. And we literally have mapped out sector by sector where the unemployment's come from, and our best guess on who's in that population. It has really disproportionately impacted employees. It comes back to our Main Street businesses, as well as women, minorities, and lower wage workers. So that has been the impact on Massachusetts of COVID-19. Next, please. So a little bit on partnerships for growth. I have to say, I love this title. This was the title for our economic development plan, and the economic development bill the governor filed early this year is an act to enable partnerships for growth. And it really, the reason we like this title so much is that it just speaks to how we all operate, how we think, how we plan, how we work together to get important things done. And so that is the title of both our plan and the bill, Partnerships for Growth. You know, the governor filed the economic development bill on March 4th. We obviously didn't know that was 6 days before the state of emergency and right on the cusp of the world changing dramatically. So the bill was filed March 4th. And as we get into economic reopening and get deeper into the legislative session, we asked ourselves, what can we do to make this bill more attuned with the times we're in today? And principally, what can we do to make this bill drive recovery and equity, and perhaps in a sharper focus than it had before? Let's go to the next one. So for example, on business competitiveness, I mentioned this before around funding the innovation economy and supporting some of these key sectors. But also we recognize the incredible need to support our small and growing businesses. And so we have in the economic development bill, $50 million of support for small business coming from the state. We believe that's a record level of support of state capital that would help support our small companies. So that was one change we made to the bill to dramatically increase the financial support for our small businesses. Let's go to the next one. And that comes in two different forms. $35 million in grants to our community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, and then $15 million for micro businesses for grants to those businesses. And this is a bill, it's in the legislature now. It was passed by the House and Senate at the end of July. It's in a conference committee. And we very much look forward to working with our colleagues in the legislature to get the bill done so we can have access to this capital going forward. Next, please. Let's talk a little bit about what we're doing to encourage regional travel and to promote local spending in our communities. Next, please. A couple different things. We have these with love from postcards that highlight the regions of our economy. And you can see these on websites and advertisements around the state. But we recognize from a tourism perspective, I think tourism is going to be very different now for a period of time. We hope tourism means people traveling within the state and spending money within the state versus an attempt to get people to come in from outside the state. But I think this is going to be the new normal for a while now. I think our tourism focus will be on promoting the great attributes and great assets of tourism here in Massachusetts and encouraging folks to visit other regions of the state. Next, please. We launched a few weeks ago the MyLocalMA Campaign with a tagline of "Put your money where your heart is," right here in Massachusetts. Launched in August, this campaign will run through the end of the year. The idea really is to encourage people to change their behavior and to deliberately support local businesses. Obviously, during the pandemic, the share of spending of online businesses grew dramatically. We like people to come home and spend money in their home communities. And so again, this theme of Main Streets, our Main Street businesses need our focus, need our money now more than ever, and encouraging people to, as we say, find your local, find those local businesses and support them. It's going to be a comprehensive campaign, including print, broadcast, billboard and digital ads, along with social media. There'll be resources for consumers, links to find local shops, restaurants and attractions around the state. If you own or work at a local business, you can help spread the word by downloading a toolkit. And let me just say on this campaign, we launched this very quickly. We've gotten a fair amount of feedback and we encourage feedback as we go. And we will continue to make adjustments as we go here. But the idea being from August till the end of the year to have a really comprehensive, coordinated effort to get people to think about spending more money in their home communities. Next. Let's talk about supporting an economic recovery. You know, before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about reopening. So I was honored to co-chair the governor's reopening advisory board with Lieutenant Governor Polito. And our charge was to think about a strategy to reopen the state's economy in a safe, phased manner. You know, I mentioned the governor declared a state of emergency on March 10th. It was March 24th, where businesses that were deemed to be non-essential had to close physical locations. Obviously, just a very different time where people were had to behave differently to fight the virus. And that led to a lot of our economy being closed. As we got into the spring, we realized things were better in terms of the virus. And so we had to think about a strategy to reopen the economy and to do it in a way where it was phased. Because if you opened all at once, you'd have much more transmission of the virus. The premise of the plan was to come up with a phased approach, to follow healthcare data, to have a lot of detail around what was going to open in each phase, and then have a set of protocols that govern how those workplaces and environments could operate. I encourage you to take a look at mass.gov reopening. Our plan is on there. There's a lot of information on there. I'm sure folks have spent some time on that site. And I will say, I think this plan is going pretty well. We outlined 4 phases. We were detailed on which workplaces and which parts of the economy would open in each one. We early on had businesses open that didn't have a lot of contact with the public, that weren't particularly customer facing. But now we're in the middle of phase 3 of 4 phases. And I will say, I think for the most part, we're doing pretty well. I'll give you one data point. On May 18th, when we started reopening, the 7-day average positive test rate for COVID was 10%. And sitting here today in mid-September, it's 0.8%. And so even though the economy is much more open than it was a few short months ago, the health indicators that we identified as being critical continue to progress really well. And that is really a testament to all of us, because one of the key parts of this plan, this reopening plan, is shared responsibility. The idea that we all have a role to play here. We all have a role to play in fighting the virus and limiting its transmission. And I will say, for the most part, individuals and businesses are all doing their part in a really, frankly, pretty inspiring way. So that's where we are now. We're well into the reopening process. and thinking very actively and acting on an agenda to help the economy recover. Next, please. So a few things that are going to become available, that are available now to drive the recovery agenda. Grant funding through the Community Development Block Grant program. It will support qualifying micro enterprises impacted by COVID-19. We have some examples here of communities that have CDBG-backed assistance programs, but this will be a very active program, around the state to help, again, support our small businesses. Mass Development has a program called Resurgent Places that assists local economic recovery efforts as community partners prepare public spaces and commercial districts to serve residents and visitors. And a few examples here in Haverhill and Amesbury as well. The Shared Streets and Spaces grant program through MassDOT provides grants anywhere from $5,000 up to $300,000 for cities and towns to really quickly implement and expand their public spaces, really to help support outdoor activity. So outdoor dining, for example. This program has been very well received so far. The governor last week announced a doubling of the program. And so again, capital programs to help our communities plan and execute on an agenda to help facilitate more activity in their downtowns, particularly outdoor activity, which is safer than indoor activity today. And the site readiness program for Mass Development, again, more capital dollars to help prepare more sites for development around the state. These are just a few tools in the toolbox that we will look to help drive the recovery agenda. Next, please. I mentioned life sciences before. It really has been a critical part of our economy all across the state. And we have here an example of companies headquartered or operating in Massachusetts that are working to develop diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics related to COVID-19. And it's a really, I think, interesting example to think about. One is to have this set of companies operating in our state is just an incredible economic asset. Secondly, it's an incredible healthcare asset. And I think in so many ways, the world's going to look to Massachusetts for solutions to help get rid of the virus, help treat the virus, help inoculate people from it. So it's inspiring to think about the companies, the brain power we have here in Massachusetts, and so many smart people working on this very hard problem here in Massachusetts, which will drive great public health outcomes as well as great economic outcomes. Next, please. And I want to talk about our manufacturing emergency response team. This is an effort we stood up, back in early March, really at the very early days of the pandemic, where we recognized that given the nature of the virus and the medical needs, the needs of our first responders and our healthcare providers, we knew we were not going to have enough personal protective equipment to help meet those needs. And so we have something called the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative, which I get to co-chair. And we've had this effort now for a long time to help drive the advanced manufacturing industry in Massachusetts. And through our collaborative, we thought, how can we stand up a dedicated effort to help Massachusetts manufacturers repurpose their production lines and start producing some of this PPE, so masks and face shields and gowns and other products. And fast forward 6 months, we have 50 manufacturers in Massachusetts that have gone through this process, that have, with advice and guidance from the state, from federal partners, from our academic partners, from many others, help design products, help come up with the specifications, help get through a regulatory process, but to really pivot their production lines and start making PPE. So 50 companies that to date have produced over 5.5 million pieces of this equipment. If you look out, the number of companies in Massachusetts that are going to make N95 masks, a product that's in great demand, that I think is going to be 28 million N95 masks. So we really have set ourselves up well here to satisfy our supply chain needs going forward. And it's just a great example of collaboration, a great example of the business community rallying to the cause, coming together with creative solutions that are going to help us, again, from a healthcare standpoint and an economic standpoint. And of course, always fun to highlight a great Lawrence company, 99 Degrees, who I think has now made 1 million gowns in their facility. So really inspiring example of businesses coming together to help solve or address an urgent public need. I think that's all I've got now today in terms of slides. I will just say, back to this theme of partnership, it has been a very difficult time for all of us, but we all have worked together. I know we all continue to work together, and I look forward to your ongoing partnership as we go from this reopening of the economy to a robust economic recovery. Thank you very much.
Secretary Kennealy, thank you very much. Thanks to Governor Baker. Thanks to all the members of the cabinet and the administration who have paid such careful attention to the things that you've described here for us. We've already had a question about whether we'll share this presentation with participants.
Sure.
And yes, we will make sure we'll do that.
Yep.
We want to make sure and get the word out. This work means a lot to all of us. I'm going to shift right away to our next couple of speakers so we have a chance to hear from them and then come back and answer some questions that you might have for all of our speakers. So here in the Merrimack Valley, there are certainly some linchpins to economic development and to our workforce, some employment sectors that are particularly important to us. Clearly, manufacturing is one of those, healthcare, professional services. It's appropriate for a lot of reasons, I think, that our first panelist to speak after Secretary Kennealy's remarks is Kimberly Hebert, the president of New England Die Cutting in Methuen. New England Die Cutting, or NEDC, is a family-owned manufacturing company that for more than 3 decades now has provided a variety of products, precision tapes, gaskets, insulators, other vital internal components to the defense industry, to aerospace, to medical device manufacturers, companies like Raytheon. In that time, under Kimberly's leadership, it has grown from just a handful of employees. And if you signed on a little early today, you may have heard Joe talking about this. Many of us have watched this growth over the last several years. A handful of employees in a small facility in Haverhill to a multi-million-dollar operation employing dozens of employees at a 70,000 square foot facility in Methuen, just off the loop. A few months ago, right before we went into quarantine, Kimberly and her husband Dave up there at NEDC hosted a meeting of the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission's Economic Development Committee, which I also chair. We had the opportunity to go on a tour that was hosted by Kimberly herself, and we saw some amazing things: laser cutters, water cutters, high-end equipment that is the best in the world, and we were impressed. But the thing that dazzled us the most and that impressed us the most was the commitment that Kimberly and Dave at NEDC have to their employees, to their workforce, to hiring, to recruiting, hiring, and nurturing the talent that we have here in the Merrimack Valley. In addition to serving on this chamber's executive committee, Kimberly is active with the Small Business Association of New England, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council, the Boston Center for Women in Enterprise, and a bunch of other organizations. She's been recognized multiple times as one of the top leaders in the state of Massachusetts. It's my great privilege to introduce to you Kimberly Hebert, New England Die Cutting. Over to you, Kimberly.
Lane, thank you so much for that great intro. Thank you, Michael, for all of your comments. I was making some notes here while you were talking and thinking about the COVID impact that it's had across the Merrimack Valley. And what I wanted to communicate to all of our listeners today is that, you know, in manufacturing, we've been very, very blessed. We primarily work in the defense area, and for that, that's been very, very strong. For the aerospace segment of our revenue, that's been pretty soft. We, as Lane mentioned, we work with Raytheon to provide gaskets to them, and at the same time, they merged with Rockwell. Rockwell's had a couple of acquisitions with UTC, and so there's a lot of movement out in the defense and aerospace industry, and it's actually behooved the aerospace to partner with defense because where they've experienced some softness, they've remained strong and been carrying that through. But while we've had a very strong stream, we have experienced some softness in the aerospace. We do expect that to recover in the mid-2021, more towards the end of 2021 is what we're hearing from a lot of our customers. But for the defense space, that's been strong, as I mentioned. And we've had a great team of employees through this entire COVID situation. And we were deemed a mandatory business through COVID, so we worked it when everything was shutting down. Our employees still came in every day. We were forced to really kind of pioneer, I would say, a lot of the precautions that I was hearing later, 3 months later, out in businesses opening up. We had implemented temperature gauges and masks and policies and one-way entry and one-way exits. And, the management team and I all sat down and we figured it out, and it worked out well. To date, we have not had a COVID case here. And I really credit that to just everybody really taking the precautions and everybody buying into what we all had to do. And at the same time, we had Dartmouth Hitchcock come to us. We made over 100,000 face shields for Dartmouth, as well as for other New England area hospitals in Boston. And they were all one-use throwaway face shields. So while we had no interest and still have no interest in making PPE, the FDA relaxed a lot of the regulations that would be required to manufacture any medical grade PPE. So we were able to help out the best that we could there. So we're very, very proud of that. I would say concerns now where we're at with the COVID situation would include compliance. We had our AS 9100 audit during COVID, and it was a virtual audit. And I have my own concerns relative to other manufacturers out there. Very easily, if an auditor is asking for a piece of paper and they're sitting next to you, they can see exactly what you're doing, what you're pulling. If they're asking for it virtually and you're just emailing it, you know exactly what the auditor is looking for, and you have a little bit of play there that you can prepare, fix, do anything you need to, and send it to the auditor. So I do have concerns about like where our defense and aerospace industry is going with this virtual audits. Source inspections, even, we have source inspectors that come into our facility, and we've been setting them up in a conference room. They're not in our QC area. They're not looking through things that they would normally be looking at. They're not in the QC room seeing that, somebody, there might be a gauge that might be not calibrated. So we run a pretty tight ship here, and I'm proud of the work we do and the standards that we run by. But I do have concerns for where, as an industry, a lot of the suppliers may be, and I think it's opening us up for some risk. So I'll be interested to see where that goes. Another concern I have with COVID right now is that employees have been conditioned to want to work from home, not as much accountability. So we've been, working on that. We did have some people working from home. Then we brought them back in towards the reopening phases to try to protect some people. But it's very, very hard to fight that fight once your policies are relaxed. It's pretty hard to tighten policies back up again. So we are experiencing a little bit of that. And at the same time, what I thought when the COVID situation happened is that, boy, there's going to be a lot of people out of work, and they're all going to we're going to be able to hire more people because the business is growing, we need more people. The problem with that, even up until very, very recently, is the extension of unemployment benefits, the federal on top of the state. So, even some of our people said, boy, I'd rather be laid off. So that's a concern as we go forward, that, that it's worth it to work. That's a challenge. And then the last challenge I'd say we've had that seems to be loosening up now was when this whole thing happened. We were trying to get PPE for our own people, face shields. I remember Pentucket Bank called me up and said, what is this line that you have, $8,000? And I said, $8,000 in face masks and PPE. You just couldn't get your hands on it, and if you wanted it, you had to pay for it. And there was a lot of gouging out there, but we did what we had to do. But even down to shop supplies, we use Q-tips, alcohol in our facility. A lot of our materials through supply chain are all within the U.S., but even then, we've experienced some challenges in, suppliers saying, well, because of COVID, there's going to be a delay. So that seems to be loosening up now a lot more than it was. But we had to keep a tight grip on that. So that's all I have for comments today to share with you and the challenges we've had through COVID. But so thank you.
Kimberly, thank you. One of the great benefits of these kinds of forums is that it brings people together who can benefit from one another. And as you were describing the challenges you're facing, I saw Secretary Kennealy taking a lot of notes. And as on top of things as he and the administration are, I'm sure you'll get some responses to some of those. And we'll come back around and ask some more questions here in a few minutes. Kimberly, we want to be as supportive as we can be of you and other manufacturers in the Valley. So thank you for sharing all that. Besides being two parts to Secretary Kennealy's resume, there are two parts to his title, Housing and Economic Development. And our next speaker here has a big role to play in the housing part of that title. Lou Minicucci is the founder and president of Minco Development Corporation, launched in the early 1980s. We went back to the archives so that I could properly introduce Lou to all of you. I'll get to this picture here in just a minute. He started his career in real estate, developing subsidized multifamily housing and expanded into commercial real estate, building things like grocery stores and banks and hospitals. At a time when we so desperately need more new residential construction. If you signed on early to this call, you heard us talking about that. He has developed more than 2,000 units of housing in both New England and in Southeast Florida. So big applause to Lou and Minco for all of that. Like Secretary Kennealy and Kimberly Hebert, he's also committed to public service. He serves on boards, often as the chair for chambers of commerce, the United Way, hospitals, banks, school committees, Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCA, and more. When he was younger, as some of you might know, Lou was an amazing athlete playing all kinds of sports. Here he is with his longboard at Salisbury Beach next to his aunt, who was a lifeguard at the beach. Lou played football for 4 years when he attended North Andover High School, as well as a couple of years of basketball and a few years of baseball. And he's in the North Andover High School Hall of Fame. And I mention that because a couple of months ago, when COVID-19 struck and students were sent home from area schools, ending their sports seasons, Lou stepped up and he decided to sponsor the 2020 Eagle Tribune Student Athlete Award, honoring the best of the best from our 22 area high schools, which I think is just spectacular. Lou, thank you so much for doing that. Rayanne, you can go ahead and take the surfboard picture down now. We'll put it up some other time. The last thing I'll say, Lou has a daughter, and who all of us know now as State Representative Christina Minicucci. And for most of her life, she was known as Lou's daughter. These days, more and more, he has become known as Christina's dad. So I welcome you, Christina's dad. Thank you for being here with us. And the rest of you, please join me in welcoming Lou Minicucci.
Thank you, Lane, and I appreciate those really kind words. That's very interesting, that long board that you showed. The typical surfboard today is about a third that size. I also like to thank Mike Kennealy for his presence here, and I do want to say that when we've developed housing throughout the state, and we need a lot of assistance with the EOCD and DHCD today, I guess. Mike has steps forward and is a tremendous help, and most recently in the project that we're doing in Lynn, a 331 unit development project. So thank you, Mike, and thank you, Lane. Very quickly, Joe said, I'd like you to talk about various aspects of the, are you following, am I on? Yeah, okay, thank you.
You are, you're good.
All right, so Joe had asked me to talk about various aspects of the real estate industry, not just housing. In my prior years, I did more retail and office development, and over the last 20 years more so get into residential development. But as you know, we have a real estate firm in North Andover base, and we deal in all sectors of the real estate market. So Joe said, we talk about all the sectors. tell me how COVID has impacted them and what do you see for the future, and try to do that all in about 5 to 7 minutes. I'm going to do my best. One of the first areas I'd like to get into is industrial space and lab space. And I think that the lab space was just brought up by Mike regarding mass biotech. So the first thing about the office space in the suburban northern metro market where we are, we're seeing some vacancies, obviously. People tend to work more at home. People realize that, and businesses realize that their employees can be at home, requiring less space. Right now, the Metro North Boston area for office space has a 15% vacancy factor. We anticipate that that will go up to about 20%. However, Greater Lawrence and the Andover office submarket is doing much better. We're currently at about 12%, and that is expected to rise to maybe 15% is the projection right now. So office space is not one of the big winners in this COVID era. However, lab space has been very strong. And lab space is in high demand because of gene therapy and vaccines that are being developed in Massachusetts. Over the 50 manufacturing companies that are based here and that are growing fast. And we're seeing some very high rental levels. We're seeing rental levels for lab space at $48 a square foot. Those are the highest rental rates that I have seen since I've been doing this for 40 years. And it ties very much into the good manufacturing practices that a lot of these biotech industries are utilizing. And it's because they're bringing, relocating industries from China and Puerto Rico, because we need to have these vaccines and therapies. We're finding that it's better to have them sourced and manufactured here. So we're seeing a lot of growth in lab space requirement in the Merrimack Valley, not so much in office space. Industrial space is another high area and high growth. Our industrial rate, vacancy rate in Greater Lawrence is 5%. Again, 40 years I've been doing this, never seen industrial space at such a low level. And the rental rate is $10 a square foot. That, again, is probably the highest rate in the last 40 years. You're seeing a big demand in industrial space, particularly at the intersections of 93 and 495. That would be the epicenter, and as you get away from that, demand would diminish a little bit. But manufacturing today are seeing requirements that they hadn't seen in the past. They need the supply chain disruption is becoming a very real thing. So manufacturers used to have 2 to 3 month stores of inventory. Now they're looking at 9 to 12 months. So if you've got inventory that you've got 9 to 12 months worth of raw materials and inventory that you need to have on site, your space requirement has grown. So industrial space has grown. We're bringing some manufacturing back to the U.S. and so that office space not doing well, as we said, in Greater Lawrence, we're going to see about a 15%. Values are going to go down. We figure from $175 a square foot to about $150 a square foot for office space in the Merrimack Valley. That will go back up in a couple of years. Lab space, very strong. Industrial space, very strong. So that's kind of a quick overview of the commercial office and lab space, not including retail, which I'll get to. Another area that we can talk about, and I like to talk about, is in the residential sector. There's been a lot of discussion about a flight from the urban centers, Boston, to the suburban areas. So there's been a lot of discussion about, well, what's going to happen with housing in Boston? What's happening with property values in the Merrimack Valley? And I've tried to, and I haven't taken a very scientific look at that, but I've kind of gone through some information that's readily accessible to us. And And I've taken a sub-market in Boston, and I took the South End because that's been a market that had been growing quite a bit over the last 20 years. And I looked at a snapshot of the number of listings that existed on 9/15/2019. So the number of listings in the South End 1 year ago, there were 73 listings, and they lasted on the market on average about 51 days. Today, in the South End, there's 210 listings, and they're averaging 68 days. So you can see there's about 3 times the amount of listings in the South End. The total market volume in the South End a year ago was $100 million. Today it's $300 million in terms of listings. So there is something happening in the cities, maybe short-term, long-term, it's really hard to say. But that's kind of the facts of what's happening. Started looking out to the suburbs. I recently completed a 55-unit project in Cambridge, condominium, sold out in 2 months. I went back and I said, okay, what's really happening in Cambridge today as a result of COVID? Now, Cambridge, to us in the Merrimack Valley, we kind of look at it as the city, but Cambridge is really a suburb. I have a condo and a townhouse in Boston, and the mentality when I talk to my neighbors in downtown Boston, they say, well, Cambridge, that's the suburbs. The sales volume in last year were 97 listings at this time. In 9/15 and 20, there's 111 sales. So there's basically about the same. So we haven't seen a big impact in Cambridge, whereas South Boston, we've seen a threefold. One thing that's really curious, though, was the rental market in these areas. And the rental market in Cambridge last year at this time was 264 units available. Today, there's 771 units available. It's 3 times again. So the rental market is different than the actual sales market. People are looking to relocate to the suburbs, Cambridge being a suburb, believe it or not. But the rental market in Cambridge is 3 times, the inventory right now is 3 times as high as it was. And that's because of the impact of Harvard, Yale, those schools not going back. So there isn't quite the demand. Again, I see that as short term, just like I see the South End short term. What does that mean to the Merrimack Valley? I looked at the listings of single family homes in North Andover. I just took North Andover as an example. There were 54 listings last year in North Andover. At this time, there's 25 now. So there's half as much. And if you just talk to people looking for housing in suburban communities like North Andover, they say the market's really tight. Pricing is going above asking price, but the statistics will kind of bear it out. The actual inventory is half of what it was. Same with condominiums in North Andover. There's 13 units, now there's 6 at the same time a year later during COVID. So there is, so you can see that there's inventory building up in the city, scarce inventory in the Merrimack Valley at least. So I looked at rental markets, and we have developed a 40B project in North Andover, a 200-unit project called Berry Farms. We have a 98% occupancy rate. That's rarely do you ever hit 98% because you always have transit people moving and turnovers and so forth, but we have a very high occupancy rate. Our partner, the Dolan Group, manages a building on Memorial Drive in Cambridge, and there's an 88% occupancy rate, or in other words, a 12% vacancy rate. And this again is due to, I think, when you see some softening in the rental market in the cities because of the universities and colleges. So that's a little bit about what I see in the housing industry. Personally, our firm is very bullish about creating rental housing. Affordable rental housing is a great need, extremely short supply. And when we talk about economic growth, and I think Mike will agree, you really can't have economic growth unless you have housing opportunities. You need, workers need to have a a place to live. Not only do they need a place to live, they need an affordable place to live. So housing is one of the components that will drive our economic rebound and redevelopment here. And I agree with Mike that we are in somewhat of a housing crisis. To kind of wrap it up, I see that office vacancies in the Metro North suburb approaching 21%, Merrimack Valley about 15%. I see industrial continuing to be in a very limited supply. Metro North has got permits for about 3 million new square feet. About half of that has already been spoken for, the rest is speculative, but industrial space will continue to grow. Lab space I think, will continue to grow, and that continues to grow in the city and the suburbs. And I think the competitive advantage that the Merrimack Valley has, Andover market has seen a lot of growth, is that we're currently at about $48 a square foot for lab space. Downtown Boston, Cambridge lab space, you'll see at $65, $70 a square foot. So there's a 40% differential in cost. I think that there's potential cost benefit savings to relocating in the Merrimack Valley a half hour into Boston and Cambridge is attractive, and that will continue to grow. Some of the hot activities, I think, in our area and the economy in general, Amazon, 2 million square foot facility being built in North Andover. Home delivery, anything relative home delivery is fast growing. Lowe's, Home Depot, looking, their business has expanded. GMP, good manufacturing practice facilities will continue to grow. The future, I think there's going to be somewhat limited activity in some of the other areas, limited decision making until a vaccine. So you'll see some major growth will not occur. I think will be on the drawing boards before people actually pull the trigger. I think they're going to want to see what's happening with COVID and the vaccine. There's a suburban flight, the inner city suburban flight to the suburbs that's continued in the short run. I don't know what the long-term future of that is. All I can speak to is what's happening today. I think that I have a project in Wellesley that's that I've seen a lot of our tenants who work out of their house and who have reservations about saying, you know, I kind of like working here. I'd like to maybe go back to the office 1 or 2 days a week. I think we're going to see some trend, people continue to work out of their homes, putting less demand on office space that, you know, we have talked about. Retail, that has been in transition for quite a while. We all know the malls are having difficulties. They'll continue to have difficulties. The places like Macy's are going to be hard hit. Retail like Stop and Shops, supermarkets will do well. CVS's of the world will do well. And essential services will do well. The non-essential services, as we can just imagine, entertainment, hospitality, are weak and will continue to do that. We don't know what that will gyms really come back. A lot of people have developed home gyms and say, well, I made an investment in a home gym. I kind of like it. It saves me some travel time. So things of that nature, we're not certain if they'll come back. In terms of the travel industry and hotels and so forth, I don't have a lot of statistics on that, but I heard something that I thought was very interesting. The chairman of American Airlines had mentioned that their travel volume over Labor Day weekend was 900,000 passengers. Typically last year in the Labor Day in 2019, not typically, but their actual travel volume was 2.2 million. I figured that was like this year was about 40% of what the travel was in 2019. And so if you projected that, the travel industry, the tourism industry, hotels, I don't know, I couldn't tell you what their occupancies are or what their demand is, but it just seems to me that and we all know that it's down, that might be a number. So as that comes back, that industry, I think, will slowly come back again as the vaccines and the therapeutics come. So I guess that I've tried to relate a little bit of, I think, what we all know is happening with little statistics. It's non-scientific. I've kind of depended on other resources for my information. But a lot of this rings true to me. I live every day the demand for housing. I see it. There's a really big demand in almost every type of housing. I see it in the suburbs. I see a softening in the cities. We see a softening of office space, but we see a very high demand for industrial and lab space. We see a softening of retail space. So that's kind of my, I guess, assessment of the real estate market in the Merrimack Valley. Hope that's good.
Thank you. We gave you a challenging task and you more than rose to the occasion. We said cover a whole lot of ground in just a few minutes. And I think you've proven that you're our very own regional E.F. Hutton. You talk and we listen. We were riveted. So thank you so very much. I see here on the screen some names that are probably particularly interested in what you were just saying. We've got planning people from cities and towns like Ann Ormond and Andover and Angela Cleveland and Amesbury and Andrew Hurley and Haverhill. May have some questions. There are two questions in the chat. I know we're going to run short on time here soon. Let me put them out there. Secretary Kennealy, we've got a question here, very specific. You can probably answer pretty quickly. Andre Silva from Y Para Todos wants to know, how does one participate in the directory for MyLocalMA?
Right.
MyLocalMA.
So we're adding chambers and business groups all the time now to the site, and it's really through your local chamber. That's really the best way to do it. But we're getting more chambers engaged and active on the site as we speak.
Perfect. So Andre, you're patched in right here through your chamber. We've got a question from Linda Dean Campbell, actually. Any new initiatives being discussed for our smaller restaurants as we move toward winter?
It's a great question. The answer is yes. And just by way of background, we recognize what a challenging time it's been for small businesses generally. We've tried to come to the table with capital and assistance for small companies in a variety of ways. There are a couple potential sources of funding coming down the pike in terms of more CDBG funding and other direct funding for small businesses that were in a supplemental budget the governor signed recently. We're also thinking about things like permitting and how to extend the outdoor season for restaurants. The governor did revise an order that extended the permitted season for restaurants. It was going to be November 1st. It's now 60 days beyond the state of emergency. And we're starting to think about things like, for example, heaters. Can we provide, are there permitted issues around having heaters and tents for restaurants? I mentioned the Shared Streets and Spaces program. MassDOT put that out there as a way to, frankly, not knowing what the needs were going to be. And they found it was really helpful for restaurants. So communities would use that capital and buy jersey barriers and other equipment to create an outdoor seating capacity that wasn't there before. So we're very much aware of the fact that outdoor dining has been essential for our restaurants. And the question for all of us is, how do we prolong that season and provide some other assistance?
Right. Thank you for that. You got a thumbs up from Representative Campbell. Thank you, Linda. So at this point, just before I turn things back over to Joe, if anyone wants to raise a hand, jump on screen. We've got a small enough group here. If you have a question, we can probably simply recognize you. Hearing none, let me just say, Secretary Kennealy, we were honored to have you join us today. Thank you for the large volume of incredibly important information. Kimberly Hebert, New England Die Cutting, as always. And Lou, I meant that. E.F. Hutton, we talk, we listen. That was just great. I, for one, would love to have you present just yourself for a coffee session, a lunch session, or a happy hour session. We'll come back and join you because you have a lot more to say. Yeah. So thanks to all of our panelists today. Joe, back over to you.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Lane Glenn. Did a fantastic job being the moderator. I want to say thank you once again, Lane, for all you do, helping the economic development initiatives here in the Merrimack Valley. As an individual and as president of Northern Essex Community College, I want to say thank you. Lou Minicucci, I am always amazed at what Lou has done over the years. Lou is a very quiet person, as you can tell, but his company, Minco Development Corporation, does absolutely fantastic things throughout the region, and I listen to Lou all the time. And Kimberly, let me tell you one thing I was so impressed with Kimberly when I toured her company for the very first time was how much she actually knows about the company. She's not the president in name only. She is the person that actually knows what's being done, and she is the person that knows what that, excuse me, I'm just being handed something, what the future holds for manufacturing in the defense-related industry. And to have a woman president in a defense-related industry today is absolutely remarkable. And obviously, our good friend, Michael Kennealy. Let me tell you, there's one thing about the secretary, and he is in a very difficult position. But the secretary, whenever you call Mike Kennealy, he calls you, he's there. His first response is, what can I do to help? And secretary, I know, you know, we've known each other a long time. I'm not just saying that. I see you all the time. I talk to you all the time. I serve on a state board that the secretary is chair of. And I just want to say thank you once again for all you do, because the Merrimack Valley is, as you know, on those conference calls, I tell you all the time, is in a unique location. We're on the New Hampshire border, so obviously we have a different set of circumstances than other parts of the state. And the secretary is keenly aware of that, and I want to say thank you for what you've done. I just want to say thank you to a couple other people, and that's the sponsors of our program. And our sponsors are All Pro Electric, the Merrimack Valley Chamber's Business Program, which is the Chamber's Economic Development Initiative, and Minko Development Corporation. I want to say thank you to all of you. I just also want to say something about the upcoming programs. The Chamber is really developed into an economic development program, and we hosted earlier this year the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs at a conference. On next Tuesday, we're going to host the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development to talk to issues about both employers and employees. And then on Monday, we're developing a new program called Agritourism, Mr. Secretary. It's going to have Kiko is going to be there, the director of the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism. And what we want to do is we want to recognize the fact that we have so many opportunities, whether it be in our hospitality industries, but also in our farms and those types of activities, our wineries. And we want to show people that this not only is a get well, feel well kind of endeavor, but it's also part of the economic fabric of the Merrimack Valley. So we're creating that program. And there'll be several other new initiatives that'll be coming forward in the Chamber, and we want to welcome anyone to become a member of the Merrimack Valley Chamber if they're not right now. But Lane, I could go on for a couple hours, as you know. I will not do that. I promise that you and all others that we will get you off early. I just want to say thank you. I think we accomplished quite a bit today. And once again, the resources remain available here in the Merrimack Valley through the good efforts of Mike Kennealy. Also, I want to say thank you to two other special people, Secretary. Maria and Peter, the MOBD people who work so well here in the Merrimack Valley. We call upon them all the time. They visit with our companies, and that's so critically important, because the worst thing is to have someone say to you, come to my office in Boston. Instead, Maria DeStefano and Peter Milano work here in the Merrimack Valley, come visit us, and we use them all the time, along with the Mass Small Business Development Corporation individuals headquartered in our region in Salem, but also going back to Georgiana, all the way on the other part of the state. So I want you to know that we utilize those resources along with the SBA people. Coming up October 1, we're going to be doing a hybrid small business recognition program in conjunction with Bob Nelson from the SBA, who's been a true partner over this pandemic issue. But I want to say thank you, Lane. I'm done. I keep looking at notes around my office, and I keep thinking of things to say. So Lane shaking his head saying, you're done, you're done.
Mute him, Rayanne, mute him.
And yeah, no. Thank you all. And I want to say thank you to Rayanne, who has been the mastermind of our virtual programming. And Michael, our vice president, coordinates our economic development initiatives. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great day. The sun is shining. And thank you once again. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.